People were concerned it was a mad, crazy clown.
This is not fun and games.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 times cold cases got red hot.
I guess case of the century for us. You know, I mean, it was a case that people worked on at this agency for 65 years.
For this list, we're looking at the most exciting and unbelievable stories in which cold cases were solved years later. Which of these stories do you find the most fascinating? Let us know in the comments below. Number 10. Karen Klaas. Back in January of 1976, Karen Klaas, known as the ex-wife of the Righteous Brothers Bill Medley, was attacked while returning home and strangled with her own pantyhose.
The attack sends shockwaves through the small community.
It was very shocking that this would happen and that the peace and tranquility of this town would be shattered.
This caused her to lapse into a coma, and she passed away just a few days later. The death pained Medley, causing him to take a hiatus from music and hire a private investigator to hunt for the mysterious killer. Unfortunately, the trail went cold, and the case remained unsolved for the next 40 years.
This was random. It's very hard for a detective to pinpoint who might have done it.
He virtually just disappeared into the twilight.
In 2017, investigators announced that they had finally cracked the case. They utilized familial DNA to identify convicted felon Kenneth Troyer as the assailant.
They were able to, with scientific advances in forensic technology, take the evidence that they had and do new things with it.
Familial DNA was king. It was how we solved this case.
Troyer did not face repercussions, as he was killed by cops back in 1982. Number 9. Colette Aram. The night before Halloween of 1983, British teen Colette Aram was abducted while walking to her boyfriend's house. Her deceased body was found the next morning. The case was featured on BBC's Crime Watch and resulted in over 400 calls. But despite the public's interest, the trail went cold.
The police and a grieving family need your help. As you're about to see, the nature of the killing leads to the fear that he might well strike again. It's a macabre story made even more bizarre by this letter that was sent to the police by a man who claims to be the murderer.
But then something amazing happened. In 2008, a young man named Jean-Paul Hutchinson was DNA swabbed after being arrested on a random vehicle charge. And investigators discovered a near-identical match to the killer's DNA profile.
An analysis of his DNA profile showed a lot of similarities with the DNA profile that they'd got from the exhibits around Colette's murder.
However, he was too young to have committed the crime. Police then went to his father, Paul Hutchinson, and found an identical match. Hutchinson was arrested and sentenced to life, and he passed away in prison in October of 2010.
We have the satisfaction of knowing who it is. It's not going to bring Colette back, and it's not going to reduce the suffering that we've gone through for the last 26 years. We just have the satisfaction of knowing that he's now behind bars.
Number 8. The Pima County Jane Doe. Hunters were in the area of Pima County, Arizona when they found a jacket hanging from a tree. Investigating the bizarre sight, they found the body of a deceased woman laying in the nearby brush.
Who is Jane Doe? All detectives had was a body and clothes found nearby. 34 years. Missing persons reports spread across the country trying to identify her.
An autopsy revealed that she had been strangled. Despite extensive efforts, the woman was never identified. But in 1995, a man named John Kohlhauser was arrested, and investigators found him in possession of a photograph.
To be honest, a little bit of luck.
That luck? This photo. Tucson police still had it as evidence from a case against Kohlhauser in 1995. He's currently still serving time for killing his wife.
The blonde woman in the photo resembled the facial reconstruction made of the Pima County Jane Doe. She was eventually identified as Brenda Giroux, a woman who had disappeared in 1980 after leaving the state with her boyfriend, John Kohlhauser. Kohlhauser is now the primary suspect in her death.
Even with the victim identified, this investigation continues. In fact, Kohlhauser is only listed as a person of interest in this case. So they are asking anyone with information, even after all this time, to please call.
Number 7. Adam Walsh. While shopping in Sears with his mother, Adam Walsh was left at the video game kiosk with a group of older boys. A security guard then kicked the boys out after they began fighting, and Walsh disappeared.
And I kissed Adam goodbye that morning and never saw him again.
2 weeks later, his remains were found in a canal. Suspicion fell on Otis Toole, the criminal partner of serial killer Henry Lee Lucas. Toole confessed to the crime, and there was some evidence pointing towards his guilt.
Toole, a serial killer, was a suspect from the beginning, but police acknowledge missteps in the investigation.
However, the police botched the investigation by misplacing key pieces of evidence, and Toole's confession was deemed unreliable as he often confessed to crimes he didn't actually commit. 27 years later, the case was officially closed by Hollywood Police Chief Chad Wagner, who officially identified Toole as the killer.
It is our determination and conclusion that Otis Toole was the abductor and murderer of Adam Walsh.
Number 6, Nova Walsh. A young woman by the name of Nova Walsh went missing in July of 1981, leaving behind 2 children. A friend of Walsh then received a letter claiming she had been attacked on a date. 3 weeks after the disappearance and 6 days after her friend received the letter, Walsh's body was found in a cupboard inside her home. A wad of gum was found securing the lock to the cupboard. 36 years later, the same DNA was found on both the gum and the letter, implicating Walsh's ex-boyfriend and the father of her children, Osmond Bell. Bell had apparently grown jealous of Walsh's new boyfriend, killed her, and then wrote the letter to misdirect both her friends and the authorities. Number 5, Killer Clown. Back in 1990, Marlene Warren was shot to death at her own front door by a clown.
At the time of the shooting, Marlene's 22-year-old son, Joe, is at home with friends and gets a brief look at his mom's killer clown.
He remembers seeing the clown's brown eyes as the clown got into a white Chrysler LeBaron.
Just hours later, authorities received an anonymous call telling them to investigate Warren's husband Michael and a woman named Sheila Keene. Detectives found that Keene and Michael Warren were having an affair, and Keene was spotted buying clown apparel just days before the killing.
She said, I need to buy a costume, and I said, can you come back tomorrow? We're closed. And now I really need to get a costume tonight.
Her hair was also found in the getaway car, and she owned shoes with traces of orange wig fibers that seemingly matched that of the clown wig. Regardless, Keene was never charged owing to a lack of DNA evidence. It wasn't until 2017 that advanced DNA testing officially implicated Keene, and she was finally charged with the death of Warren.
But now, the woman they know as Debbie is preparing to answer first-degree murder charges and could face the death penalty.
Number 4, Joseph Henry Loveless. In August of 1979, a family was exploring an Idaho cave when they came across a burlap sack. Their curiosity getting the better of them, they opened the sack and discovered human remains.
Then, in 1979, a grisly discovery in a cave sparked an investigation.
My family found remains of a torso in a burlap sack.
12 years later, a human hand was found inside the same cave, prompting an excavation that uncovered even more body parts. The DNA Doe Project then utilized forensic genealogy and found that the remains belonged to one Joseph Henry Loveless, a man who had died back in 1916.
So many cases have been solved now using forensic genealogy that are 40 years old, really. So a 103-year-old case, that's mind-blowing. I don't think there would have been any other way to do that.
Loveless had been convicted of killing his wife, and he eventually broke out of prison using a saw blade. He was never seen again. And while the identity of the remains was answered, the nature behind Loveless's death remains a question.
With so many answers uncovered, who killed Joseph Henry Loveless?
Number 3, Crystal Buslanowicz. On the morning of December 15, 1995, Salt Lake City Sheriff's Deputy Todd Bonner was called to the Provo River. It was there that he found the body of a 17-year-old girl who had reportedly been killed with a riverside rock.
And some very large stones that had quite a bit of blood on them that appeared to have been used after she had been down.
The case quickly went cold without any leads, haunting the frustrated Bonner. But in 2007, the state crime lab received new forensics technology that allowed them to study DNA found on the rock and under Buslanowicz's fingernails.
They went ahead and used the MVAC to do the testing, and they came back with a male DNA profile.
It led them to a man named Joseph Simpson, and after trailing Simpson, investigators recovered his DNA from a discarded cigarette. It was a complete match, and Simpson was arrested 18 years after the death of Beslanowicz.
Evidence was enough as jurors have found Joseph Simpson guilty of aggravated murder in the 1995 death of Crystal Beslanowicz.
Number 2, the Peterson-Schuessler Killings. 3 boys, Robert Peterson and brothers John and Anton Schuessler, walked to downtown Chicago on the afternoon of October 16, 1955 to see a movie. 2 days later, their bodies were found in a ditch. And their deaths would have remained unsolved if it weren't for the disappearance of Candy heiress Helen Brock.
And the rumor was that she was buried underneath Glen Grove Equestrian Center, and now it's gone.
While investigating that case, ATF detectives learned from informants that a man named Kenneth Hansen had often boasted about killing Peterson.
The coup de grace was the verbal testimony of several of the young men who worked in the Hansen stables. He would say to them, "You better do what I say, otherwise you're going to end up in the ditch like those Schuessler-Peterson boys that I took care of back in 1955.
An investigation revealed Hansen's guilt, and he was sentenced to life in 2002. Hansen had reportedly kidnapped the boys and took them to a stable with mob ties. The owner of the stable then covered up the crime to prevent the authorities from uncovering his illegitimate connections. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1. Lloyd Dwayne Bogle and Patricia Kalitsky. While taking a winter hike in 1956, 3 young boys discovered the body of 18-year-old airman Dwayne Bogle. The very next day, a construction worker found deceased 16-year-old high school student Patricia Kalitsky.
The evidence that they would have been looking for is a potential murder weapon. Could they find a bullet?
Both had been shot in the same manner, and they were eventually revealed to be a couple who had died at a nearby lover's lane. The case went cold until 2019, when forensic genealogy linked DNA found on Kalitsky to a local man named Kenneth Gould.
He was just a working man. He broke horses for a living. He was a ranch hand. He lived in the area. He kept his horses in the area. So there's a good chance he knew who she was.
Gould passed away in 2007, but DNA samples taken from his children confirmed him as the culprit. The case was finally closed after more than 60 years, potentially making this the oldest case ever solved using forensic DNA.
I was so elated that they had pushed and followed through and taken the new technology and done what they could, and they had solved it.